The rise of generative AI has many of us asking it questions like, what is the meaning of life? Or what should I get my wife for her birthday? Ooh, did that already pass? Anyway, count Gene Kim among the many early adopters who find themselves fascinated by the technology's capabilities.
I've been a developer for my entire career, even though I've mostly self-identified as an ops person. But I cannot tell you how much fun I've been having with generative AI these days. Whether it's the co-pilots, whether it's all these, whether it's just ChatGPT. I cannot believe how much easier it makes things to build things they actually want. I have been having outrageous amounts of fun, building things with my kids, building tools that I think would have been a little bit out of reach, either because I didn't have enough time or the skill. So that's something I'm just having so much fun and getting endless amounts of just reward and satisfaction doing.
Gene has found generative AI to be a helpful tool not only in coding and sharpening the language of his writing, but also in learning on the go.
I'm not really a JavaScript person, so I do a lot of programming in ClojureScript, but there's all these things I don't know how to do, like what is the event model, or like what events do I need to send to a thing. So I've been writing some Tamper Monkey scripts for some sites for messaging, where instead of using their terrible interface, I get to sort of scrape all of the messages. I have my own little edit box. I can hit submit and it will populate the reply form. and it's I would have not, given my lack of experience with JavaScript, I could not be doing that without all this help. So I mean, it's just it's been so rewarding to solve my own problems in a way that I think before it would have just taken too much effort and learning too much of stuff that I really don't want to learn. Show me code samples. Walk me. Why does that work? What does X, Y, or Z actually do? It's like your private little tutor.
Of course, generative AI is not without its risks, so that means vigilance is key to avoid costly mishaps.
I think we're still learning how do we use this at a scale. So I mean, I think a lot of us, we're having so much fun using it for our individual hobby projects, and things that we'll notice are that sometimes the answers of how it solves problems are wildly incorrect, right? And so a friend of mine, they actually did a pilot at a large financial organization, and they called the pilot kind of a inconclusive, because one of the things they found was that junior developers were committing code, and it was actually the reviewer who was catching those errors. And so it was actually putting this enormous burden on the reviewer and the more senior people. And so, I think what they're, just maybe to my interpretation of that is that, I think for senior developers, people with a lot of experience, this can be a fantastic multiplier for them. And people with less experience, I think who can't distinguish kind of like even an obviously incorrect solution, it might be less useful. It might be not only sort of consumes their time, but also consumes the person who's actually supposed to be reviewing it and helping ensure the accuracy of code they're putting potentially in production.
This is the Ready Test Go podcast, brought to you by Applause. I'm David Carty. Today's guest is generative AI whisperer and author Gene Kim. Gene is a multiple award-winning CTO and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. Gene is a renowned researcher of high-performing technology organizations. And in the DevOps community, Gene is basically a household name. His latest book, which he co-authored with Steven Spear, called Wiring the Winning Organization, published a few weeks ago. The way we do work is changing, or at least it should. The organizations that can open up the flow of ideas and ease problem solving are more likely to achieve success than those who cannot. Let's learn from Gene Kim and the decades of research that the authors synthesize in his latest book, how dev and QA organizations can move from the danger zone to the winning zone. Gene, congratulations on the new book. It's been great reading through it. And you use some case studies from both the public and the private sector in this book. Everything from NASA missions and plane crashes to optimizing software design at Amazon and the release of the iPhone at Apple. Talk about running the gamut. You know you're in serious territory when you're talking about asteroid deflection, for example, right? So how difficult was it for both of you to synthesize these successes and failures? And did you come to any surprising conclusions in your research?
Yeah, for sure. And Yeah, thanks for bringing up the case studies. Yeah, so maybe I can start about like what was the goal of writing this book, and just to answer that part of your question, it was the most intellectually challenging thing I've ever worked on in my career, but also one of the most rewarding. And I think the reason is that what the goal of writing the book was really to answer the question: why do organizations work in the way they do, both in the ideal and not ideal? And answer the question of like what is in common between agile, DevOps, and which has been my area of passion, studying high performing technology organizations for 24 years. But there seems to be a lot common between those fields and also the Toyota production system, lean, safety culture, resilience engineering, which has been so much of Steve's area of study. So Dr. Steven Spear is at MIT Sloan School of Business, and he helped. He's famous for writing the 1999 Harvard Business Review article called "Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System," which is actually based on his doctoral dissertation at the Harvard Business School. And in part of that, he actually worked on the plant floor of a Tier 1 Toyota supplier for 6 months. And so, he extended the work beyond just, the high repetition work of manufacturing to engine design at Pratt & Whitney to helping build a safety culture at Alcoa. And so our conclusion after working I met him in 2014. We've been working on this for over 3 years. And our conclusion is that all of these things, whether it's Agile, DevOps, Toyota Production System, team topologies, Western organizational typology model, safety culture, is that they are all incomplete expressions of a far greater whole. And to find that there are these common mechanisms that span all of those domains has been just so illuminating, so dazzling, which explains like why we chose the case studies that we did, is to show that to the technology leader that the same principles that work in DevOps or actually work in manufacturing, in team of teams, and so forth. And so that's been so fun. And so I think the goal is to show both technology leaders and their bosses that there are things that we as leaders can do to make it amazing, to liberate the full creative activity and problem-solving capabilities of the organization. And similarly, there are things that we can do to constrain or extinguish entirely the full capability of the organization, like dividing dev and ops, making sure that they can only talk to each other through work tickets and once a year when we do a deployment. So it's been so satisfying for it to work on this.
I can still feel the stress of reading the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, the examples that you use in there when you talk about separating organizations like that. So I know exactly what you're talking about. This latest book revolves around sort of three core concepts of successful organizations, right? You mentioned them already: slowification, simplification, and amplification. I want to ask you about each of these individually, as those are the core concepts of the book. But on a high level, can you sort of explain what these ideas are in the context of a software development organization?
Absolutely. And so what we're saying, in any domain of work, in every stage of value creation, in any industry, there's basically, imagine there's two ways of doing work. We can do it in the danger zone or the winning zone. Work in the danger zone sounds like this. We have no time for planning and preparation, so we have to do all our learning in dangerous production environments that are highly complex, intertwined, highly coupled, where small problems cause global catastrophic failures. We have no ability to undo, that's those are all characteristics of danger zone properties, right? And so in the Phoenix Project, when they were trying to learn about the application while it's being deployed, in front of real life customers, right? That's danger zone characteristics. The winning zone is the exact opposite of that, is that we're able to do our most dangerous work, not in production, but in planning and preparation. We're able to work on not the entire entangled whole, but in smaller components that are contained so that small failures don't ripple out and cause global chaos and disruption. And more importantly, we can do our work independently so that, in microservices, we know that it's easier to work in smaller services where we can deploy, test, and deploy values to our users independently without having to communicate, coordinate, prioritize, synchronize, deconflict with thousands of other people in the organization. And so our conclusion is that whenever you see an organization transform, there are only three mechanisms that work. And so the first is we have to slowify. So whenever you see people doing brilliant, dangerous work, in highly consequential environments, Logic says that for them to be doing that, they had to have invested time in planning and practice, right? Because and so we see this across, whether it's Amazon Game Days, whether it's the disaster recovery planning at Google, whether it's special forces and hostage rescue operations. Navy Top Gun program was essentially one around slowification. In the Vietnam War, they found that they had unacceptable pilot casualties because it was too much on-the-job training, right? And so the result was this high-intensity school to simulate combat-like situations, right, where they could develop the habits and routines and playbooks, before they entered combat. And so the second mechanism is about simplification. How do you make the problem simpler to solve? So instead of the wildly complex and entwined, highly coupled system, how do you partition it? So either by making it more modular for parallel processes, or things linear processes like the Toyota Production System or CI/CD. How do we sequentialize it so that we can do work in parallel too, safer? And then the third mechanism is we have to amplify signals so that even weak signals of failures can be amplified and then acted upon so that we can prevent disasters from happening or enable quicker detection and recovery.
Right, I'm with you. And you know what? Two thoughts. Slowification, first of all, it sounds like something I'd really like to teach my two children, but that's not quite what it means, right? What it really reminds me of is it also reminds me of paying down technical debt, which is something that you've also studied and spoken about, right? I mean, you've talked about this at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, except that it's applied to the actual practice of problem solving and completing work, right? So what I wanted to ask you is, given
Actually,
the
can
current...
I just with you there, right? So slowification, many people note is not a real word in English. I mean, but so we made one up because it was so important to us. Is that there has to be some word that signals we're going to slow down to speed up. We're going to make a short-term investment for a longer-term gain, so there are a lot of adages for this, right? We've got a stop sign to sharpen the saw, slow, smooth as fast. So the goal was to actually sort of give it a word for this very important concept. And so with technical debt, right, the whole idea is that you can't spend all your time doing. You have to spend some time improving, right? The notion of improvement of daily work is as improvement as daily work itself. So sorry, you brought such a good point up. I did want to make sure that we didn't lose it.
No, absolutely. And what I wanted to ask is, given our current economic situation, you might have some teams that are short-staffed or overworked. Is it harder to win over hearts and minds to this idea right now? I mean, I know that's the area that you speak about all the time, is trying to influence change and things of that nature, right? Is it especially hard to try to get that concept into the minds of technology leaders today?
Yeah, I think it's no, absolutely, probably right. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, most software teams, the job is to deliver features that users need to either grow market share, to increase profitability, to save costs, etc. And so I think that is a fact of life. And so often we find ourselves in a mode where we just got to focus on delivering that feature, that functionality, to our customers, whether it's internal or external. But at a certain point in time, right, we have to invest in our own productivity and our own efficiencies, and that is often lost. And I think many people would find it surprising, who were in the field 20 years ago, about how difficult it is to justify doing, basic things like unit testing, like testing in general, right? And I think I was talking to a person who wrote the Don Iles. He wrote the lunar landing control software. And, I mentioned this concept to him, and, he was aghast. He was like, what do you mean? One, testing is not someone else's job. It's not something that you can delegate. It's not something that you can prioritize away. It is a core job of us as an engineering community. And so, I think people like him would find it surprising just how often we deprioritize, things like that. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we talk about matters like that all the time on the podcast, the digital quality and trying to be more efficient and trying to win over hearts and minds on the idea of investing in your quality, right? And in testing and that kind of thing. To move on to the next point, I want to be respectful of your time here. Simplification involves making the work, a little bit more incremental, modular, linear, right? And I can feel DevOps in this particular kind of section. Can you tell us what this approach consists of? Again, particularly in a dev kind of QA organization perspective.
So the point of simplifying is to change the nature of the problem so they are easier to solve. And so one of my favorite case studies is the Amazon API project, where they went from a situation where they were doing, say in 1999, hundreds of deployments per year, and it just got harder and harder. In fact, most deployments didn't finish to the point where they were only doing tens of deployments per year. And there was this sort of outrageous, and the reason for that is that the number of product lines kept growing. It was involving hundreds, then thousands of engineers, and there was this ridiculous situation where Werner Vogel's then and current CTO of Amazon described in 2001 the Amazon digital team. So I think that was Kindle, video. In order for them to fulfill an order, they had to provide a physical shipping address, which is definitely introduces friction into the ordering process. So they had to go to 60 plus teams and ask them, can we please reduce the need or eliminate the need to provide a shipping address? To which they would respond, we haven't budgeted for it. So go pound sand, right? And so everyone was stuck. And so this is what led to the two pizza team memo, the notion that every team, the only way they could communicate and coordinate was through APIs. And what that resulted was in the creating of hard modular boundaries between teams so they could regain independence of action, so they could all work independently of each other, right? And so the outcome of that was they were able to do in 2011 15,000 deployments a day. By 2014 they were doing 136,000 deployments per day, right? Just showing that we're really unleashing the productivity of developers to do their work well. And then I think we can see this other orthogonal technique, which is linearization. So modularization is so that people can work in parallel for parallel processes. Linearization is what we do for inherently sequential work, so like manufacturing or automated build, test, and deploy processes, right? So, in the Phoenix project, we describe these, high stakes releases where everyone depends on everyone else, and if anyone gets there is late, they delay the entire deployment. And so the idea is, how do we automate those processes and make it again enable independence of action so that the build engineers can work over here independently of the deployment engineers over there, independently of the QE, quality engineering people, in between them. So I just find that just amazing because it shows that there are a small number of mechanisms that explain so much of the techniques we use in transformation.
Oh, that's spot on. The third component, amplification, helps bring problems to light, as you mentioned. How does amplification make use of feedback to help organizations stabilize and improve reliability?
Yeah, so amplification is all about signals getting to where they're generated to where they need to go. And so in the introduction we're talking about the generative AI, where some people are finding that in these kind of early experiments, junior engineers are generating code that was assisted by AI, but they can't recognize that is actually incorrect. And so the people who have to fix it are the senior developers, which is not tenable, right? And ideally what you want is actually what we need is the feedback to go to where it's needed, which is a person who wrote the code. Similarly, right, we find that we can solve so many of these DevOps-like problems if developers build the code and run the code themselves and deploy it themselves, right? It can't go to an operations team that's distant in the organization because the signals are lost. And so I think really amplification is about making sure that the signals go to where they need to go, and that leaders are picking up even these weaker signals of failure so that they can be acted upon before they cause something genuinely horrible to happen. And I think one of my favorite examples of this is the blameless postmortem. The notion that we have a blameless postmortem that we publish to everybody for every customer impacting outage at Google, for example. My friend Randy Schaub talked about this, and he said something really magical happens is that eventually you run out of customer impacting outages to have blameless postmortems on. And so what did they do next? They had these postmortems for not just customer impacting incidents, but team impacting incidents or near misses. Of the 7 safeguards that exist to prevent a live site outage, right? 6 of them failed. All right, let's dig into that so that we can prevent a near miss like that from happening again. I think all of these are just examples of amplification at work. Oh, can I tell you one of my favorite stories on this?
Absolutely, yeah.
So one of the case studies we have is on the Apple iPhone versus Nokia. And so by all rights, Nokia should have won. They had dominant market share. They had tens of thousands of engineers. They had relationships with the suppliers and telcos. And what I found so surprising in researching the book was that the Apple iPhone initially started with a team of 10 software engineers. And so even though when they shipped, it was now dozens of engineers, it wasn't a large team. And so one, that was amazing. But two is one of my favorite books is called Transforming Nokia by Risto Salasma. And he described how one of the pivotal moments for him as a board member of Nokia was when he learned that the build times for the Symbian OS, which Nokia was depending upon to compete against the Apple iPhone, was 2 days. He said it felt like being hit in the head with a sledgehammer because he knew that if it took 2 days for an engineer to learn whether the change worked or would have to be redone, all the hopes, dreams, and aspirations that resided on Symbian OS was an illusion. And so I got to ask him in an interview, how did he take something like, build time of 2 days to be an important signal? I mean, that seems like not something that most boards talk about. And his answer just blew me away. He said, one, it wasn't that the build times took 2 days. He said it was the compile times that took 2 days, right? The build times was actually 2 weeks because they had distributed R&D centers. But he said, in any organization, you have the most important work being done. And you have to ask, is that work easy or difficult for the person doing it? And he said when he learned that the compile times where it took 2 days as a former developer, he said it was impossible for anyone to do their work easily and well. And so he said there's really 2 possibilities here. One is that the senior leaders didn't know, and that's a huge problem. Or it was that the senior leaders did know, but didn't do anything about it. And he said that is an even bigger problem. And so that's actually what led to the firing of the CEO and for him to become the CEO of Nokia. Anyway, so I just thought that was an amazing example of amplification of what we need from our leaders, right, to help support the daily work of developers and, for that matter, everyone in the engineering value stream.
Gene, I saw yesterday that the DevOps Enterprise Summit is evolving a little bit, right? And it's now going to be called the Enterprise Tech Summit. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit. Yeah, exactly.
Technology Leadership Summit. Yes. Can you explain this change a bit? And also, what does this mean for DevOps moving forward? Is it becoming more about influencing tech leaders in a direct way, or is it just a different way of looking at the conference specifically?
Oh, make no mistake, the conference is the same. And I think this is actually, for years, people have been saying, the conference seems to be a lot more than just DevOps. And I think DevOps, if you interpret it in a very narrow way, you can say it's just about deployment. And so I think many would say, no, that's a very narrow interpretation of what DevOps really is. But, what the conference has been, we've done 19 of them. We've had over 1,100 talks, 1,600 leaders sharing their experience reports about adopting technology transformation in large, complex organizations. And I'm so proud that we've had some of the best known brands across every industry vertical present amazing stories of how they're helping their organizations win. And the talks are not just about dev and ops. They're about dev, QA, ops. It's about security. It's about regulators. We have auditors. We have business leaders. Right? And so I think the aperture of the conference has certainly grown since we did the first one in 2014. And many people have said, when I tell people to go, I don't call it a DevOps Enterprise Summit. I say it's to talk about culture, organizational design, business technology working together, information security and compliance. And so, after a couple of years of hearing that, I think we finally said, all right, let's bite the bullet and call it what it really is. It's a conference for technology leaders, to help them and their organizations win.
Right, and it explores everything to psychological safety and burnout and things like that that impact the individual too, right? So that makes total sense.
Yeah. I'm so delighted to hear that people are positive about it.
Yeah, Gene, you don't strike me as a guy who likes to remain intellectually idle, and I know you just wrapped up this book and you're still discussing it, but I'm curious if you have anything on the horizon that you plan to research next.
Yeah. I think the reason we wrote this book is, I think one is to kind of create this mental model of, what is it that we're actually doing. When we talk about DevOps transformations or high-performing technology organizations, and similarly, what is it that we're doing when we talk about Toyota Production System, building safety cultures and so forth. And I feel like the mission ahead really is, how do we create the right conditions so that business leadership and technology leadership are working, hand in hand with a sense of mutual trust that they're working towards common objectives. Because I've seen so many situations where, if that top leader changes in the technology organization, the transformation dies, or maybe their business counterpart changes over, and suddenly the level of support and the amount of air cover disappears. And so I'm hoping that by creating a common language of what does it take to create outstanding performance, that this will help accelerate technology organizations to reach their highest potential. So that's my personal selfish objective, and so I think that kind of creates a roadmap of years of work to see if we can expand the reach so that we're DevOpsing in more places and with higher level support than ever.
Okay, Gene, lightning round questions here. First one, what is your definition of digital quality?
Definition of digital quality is we are doing all the things in our work so that we delight the customer, regardless of who the customer is, internal or external.
Gene, what is one software testing trend that you find promising?
Oh my gosh, I love the shift from highly expensive integration testing to shifting it all the way left so that developers are getting daily feedback, minute by minute feedback on their work, and they're getting feedback within seconds, worst case minutes, but not hours, weeks, months, or quarters.
What is your favorite app to use in your downtime?
Oh, yeah, I love this app called Feedly. It's just there's certain writers and sites that I just love reading so much. I don't want to miss any one of them, and it's just my favorite app for just reading and learning. I've used it for almost a decade.
And what is something that you are hopeful for?
Oh, I'm actually loving generative AI. In fact, something I'm actually using a lot is the ChatGPT app with the voice interface. Someone said people are spending like hours talking to it. I'm like, what? But I found myself while picking up my kids. I'm like, can you teach me about parsing CSS selectors in JavaScript? And next thing I know, I'm 25 minutes in because my questions are like, show me how to do that in JavaScript. Teach me what a CSS selector is. All these things. It's been a very fun learning tool.
Well, Gene, this has been a lot of fun. You always bring such interesting information and perspectives to the table. Congratulations on the new book, and thank you again for joining us.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me here, and continued success on the outstanding podcast.
That was Gene Kim. You can find his latest book, Wiring the Winning Organization, which he wrote with Stephen J. Spear, in our podcast notes. You can also find Gene's latest research, videos, podcasts, and resources at itrevolution.com. Thank you once again to our producers, Joe Stella and Sam Susala, and our creative team, including Megan Golick and Carly Searles. Subscribe, drop a comment, leave a review, or let us know what you think about the podcast by emailing at podcasts@applause.com. See you on the next one.